Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, the 26th of July, 2023. I'm with Crime Commissioner Anthony Stansfeld of Thames Valley Police and Lee Cant, an accountant. Today,
Ex-crime commissioner. I'm no longer the crime commissioner.
so, but we're going to take you back to when you were, if we may. Retired and okay, I'll just start. I'll do a little presentation of my little bits that I've collected. So we got as far as talking about the Criminal Appeals Court heard the appellants who were the convicted in 2017, which was this case here, heard in the Criminal Court of Appeal Criminal Division, when they tried to reduce their sentences. And so then what we're saying is that not only was this unreasonable for them to try to reduce their sentences, these individuals were accused of causing the bank losses. Now, I'm looking at what other countries do. So this is Singapore, about winding up companies that are fraudulently trading. It's automatically done. Then I was looking at the ultra vires law, where companies, corporations are acting outside of their charter documents and the laws of their formation, which relates to the bank. So how you use the individuals whilst the bank still carries on, that's the thing we're talking about, is the ineffectiveness of the Criminal Appeals Court now, as we've moved on since the 2017 prosecution and the 2020 appeal, that these crimes are still going on. So the question is, Anthony, do you know if there is any if those crimes are now gone, or are they still carrying on, and was this just a farcical thing? Over to you, Anthony.
No, I think the banks have carried on doing exactly the same crimes, and they think they can get away with it. And so far they are getting away with it. And when people who they've utterly ruined try to get some justification for this, you find that the system is so weighed against them that every case, if they can get it into a court, is in a civil court, which they're having to pay for. We have some of our judges seem to be totally in the pocket of the banks that are operating in this, and the accountancy companies. Quite honestly, some of the criminal courts totally stink. And people, even if they win a case, they are immediately appealed by the banks. And again, they run out of money, and the banks are prepared to spend unlimited amounts of their shareholders' money, and to lie absolutely repeatedly. And I mean, it's quite interesting. We're having this the day after the managing director of the National Westminster Bank, which was, of course, RBS, has just had to resign. And basically, it is quite clear the banks were lying consistently. But I've seen this for a long time now. And the trouble is, they get away with it. Nobody holds them to account. And the Insolvency Service and the Financial Conduct Authority seem to be totally in the pockets of those committing half the crimes. So it's very difficult for people to get justice, I believe.
Lee, as an accountant, what can you say about what can we do now that the banks are carried on, regardless of this criminal prosecution in the Criminal Appeals Court? Now, we've heard that somebody has, did you say resigned, Anthony? But that just means to say somebody else is going to come along and do the same thing.
Well, exactly. Most of these senior bankers end up in the House of Lords when they should be sitting in Wormwood Scrubs, because there are clear crimes being committed by the banks, which they are well aware of and have done absolutely nothing about. I mean, it is utterly scandalous. But I mean, one senior banker resigning is not going to get us anywhere. But I do think it opens up a considerable door now that the bank has been proved to have lied through its teeth, that vast numbers of people are being discriminated against and losing their bank accounts. I'm surprised I haven't lost mine yet. Yeah, it is the most extraordinary situation, and I'm actually, you probably know, I'm being interviewed by Farage about all this evening. So I hope we can drag a lot of it into the public eye now. But it is a scandalous situation, and it shouldn't be, me and people like me trying to do something about it. It should be the Financial Conduct Authority, which I'll remind you was run by Andrew Bailey, and deliberately, as far as one can make out, it certainly seemed like it deliberately covered up what was going on. And he was then promoted to the boss of the Bank of England, which I find, again, extraordinary. And, it has taken somebody like Farage to lift the stone on a complete bag of worms that's lying underneath it. So I hope we get somewhere this time.
I'll just say welcome to Andy for joining us. Thank you for coming. And I was going to ask Lee, and then I'll let Andy speak. The question is, Lee, what do we do when people have been jailed, but the corporation is still trading and the crimes are still continuing unabated, as Anthony have just said, that certain countries, other countries do actually, when this happens, they stop, and we can draw the parallels with our whistleblowers. Edward Ellis is in prison right now. His assets were frozen. Back then, when the Law Society said to him, we will let you carry on as a solicitor if you promise you won't do any anti-corruption cases. And he said, no, I'm not giving you that promise. So they said, we're striking you off, freezing your assets, closing your firm down. So I'm just thinking, if we draw the parallels with the GC MAF case, we had police raids, we had the planes and cars and homes just taken overnight. The GC MAF supplies were gone, millions of pounds worth, and they were kidnapped without any paperwork. So the parallels are when it's the banks involved, they carry on doing it. When it's the whistleblowers involved, there is no paperwork. There is nothing required by these police and these bailiffs to do what they do. There's no warrants, no writs, no hearings. It's all the parallels speak for themselves. Lee, what can we do about these parallels as being an accountant? Over.
A complete restructuring is required, a complete new way of thinking about the business of banking, and you've got shareholders' funds that are at risk, and they're not getting adequate or proper representation within the structure of the bank. So therefore, shareholders would want a new way in which to have an oversight or an insight into the inner workings of the bank. That's the first thing, because they're the owners of that corporation. And I'm not talking about the big pension funds and BlackRock, who own probably 50% of the bank. They're just as bad as the problem, the endemic problems that exist.
And Lee, can I just come back to that point of what is the law that dissolves once you've got the bankers in jail for fraudulently trading? What is the law that then applies to the company that they did all that in? So the regulators, the frauds office, the police, they haven't seized the bank's assets. And as Anthony said, that the guys just seem to resign and get promoted and get bigger salaries when they resign. So Andy, do you want to add anything to what we're talking about? Thank you.
Yeah, let's cover off some introductions as well, so I know the context of the conversation. So I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force, and we're doing all we can to bear with me, my things stop working here. My phone right now, so.
It also seems that the internal audit department within banks are failing. They're the ones that cast a net like fishermen, and that net is supposed to pick up on frauds, on theft, on assets going missing. So the internal audit is rendered useless. Then you've got the compliance department who have oversight upon trades.
Yeah,
what
Lee, shall
traders
we? Sorry, because we got a new guest. Lee, sorry, we got a new guest. I think we'll hear from Andy because, you know, Anthony needs to come, or, you know, we need to have a foursome here. So if Andy could contribute and then Anthony can respond. Thank you.
Thank you. My view and the view of the Transparency Task Force is that there is a mountain of evidence showing that, frankly, there's corruption in the banking system. And this has been ongoing since the global financial crisis, if not before. We don't trust the banks. We don't think they're acting in honour or with in faith. We think the Financial Conduct Authority protects the interests of the banks. And therefore, we are very, very worried that an incredibly important part of the UK establishment is riddled with malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, and doesn't think twice about completely destroying businesses and people's lives to get what they want. They're very greedy, they're very ruthless, they're very inhumane. There have been suicides, there's been carnage. The blast radius of the harm that they've caused goes a long, long way. But they're also extremely powerful. The banks, unfortunately, have a huge degree of influence over the Treasury and over the government, and as I've indicated already, over the regulatory framework. And they are therefore creating a real David and Goliath dynamic. Us little people with very little power and influence, trying as far as we can to fight what amounts to a monolithic giant with enormous power and resource, who quite literally will spend however much money they need to defeat justice in the courts because they've got the resources to do it. It's a horrific problem. And I'm so pleased and proud that Anthony and his incredible credibility has resulted in the chance for him to talk about these sorts of issues later on with Nigel Farage today. It's a wonderful development. And hopefully, regardless of what you think about the gentleman's politics, hopefully Nigel Farage's rather forthright approach to things means he's going to not let go of this until the truth is fully out. And so far, the signs seem very encouraging. He seems like a very effective operator. Regardless of what you think about him politically, Nigel Farage is a very, very effective operator. Thank you. That's an overview of what I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to go back to Anthony about the amount of laundering that we've got ongoing, 200 billion a year. So are you saying that amount has not changed at all since the prosecution?
I mean, I simply don't know, but I very much doubt it's changed very much. I mean, what is extraordinary, if you or I get £20,000 into our bank account, the bank will be all over you wanting to know where it came from and one thing and another. If banks move hundreds of millions between each other and through about 3 or 4 different sort code numbers, it ends up in Jersey, the Virgin Islands or the Cayman Islands, nobody knows about it. So the money laundering, you know, what individuals do is pretty small beer. It's what the banks do that is on a spectacular scale, and that is how they're able to get away with it.
So basically, we can conclude that the criminal justice system in the UK is shattered, does not work.
No, I don't think it does, because every single case ends up in a civil court where I don't believe the civil courts are honest, a lot of them. I think they are fixed. They seem to be in the pocket of the banks. I think if they end up in criminal courts. But the question that is interesting to ask is how many major frauds have gone through a criminal court? And the answer is virtually none. There was the HBOS case, which was a fraud probably between 800 million and 1 billion out of one bank. Remember, 2 other police forces had refused to prosecute it, as had the SFO. If Thames Valley, and I give great credit to the Chief Constable, Sarah Thornton, for prosecuting it, and the bank throughout that, and it was Lloyds Bank, lied throughout, saying that there was no fraud there when they knew perfectly well it was a vast fraud. And it wasn't until the jury returned its verdict in a criminal court that the bank put up its hands. And they then, of course, did their best not to pay compensation. And we've now, I think, forced them to pay out a few hundred million, but I don't think everybody's been compensated by a long chalk for what went on there. So it's a tricky one. The only other fraud that's been prosecuted was one very recently. It was about 7 or 8 months ago. And it had to be prosecuted privately. And the judge at the end of it said, I find it extraordinary that neither the police nor the CPS took on such a clear, simple fraud. And compared to the banking frauds, it involved banks, it was about £12 million. But the banks are not prosecuted. They get away with it. And the police don't have the capacity, the capability, or the money to take on a bank. And of course, when Thames Valley took on HBOS Lloyds, it cost us £7 million to bring that case. Eventually, the FCA said to the Lloyds, we're fining you. We were going to fine you 65 million, but we reduced it to 45 million because you cooperated. Let me just shut that down for a second. Because you cooperated. Well, they certainly didn't cooperate with Thames Valley Police at any stage of that investigation because they denied a fraud had taken place. That money went directly to the Treasury, didn't come back to Thames Valley to pay for the case. Now, Thames Valley was a big police force, but £7 million really hurts out of your budget. If you were a small police force, there is no way you could take on a big banking fraud, and so nobody does, and they get away with it because they know it's too expensive and they have very deep pockets for their shareholders' money. I mean, I believe Lloyds pays out nearly £1 billion. I don't know what the figure is in legal fees every year. Most of it goes to Herbert Smith Freehills. They have an active interest, Herbert Smith Freehills, in fighting every single case because Lloyds shareholders end up paying for it. I feel sorry for the shareholders of Lloyds. The only people it protects is a lot of crooked directors.
Andy, you were going to speak.
Oh yeah, a couple of things. I need to completely support everything that Anthony has just said. I have to jump off this call in about 5 minutes' time. I'll be very happy to continue having conversations with you and for the Transparency Task Force to support your aims and objectives as best as possible. My instincts are that we're very well aligned. I would just like to make one final point, which is that it's very important that we remain evidence-based in our approach. Despite the fact that we all know we are speaking the truth, it's easy for people to try to label us as, conspiracy theorist nut jobs. So it's very, very important that we remain evidence-based in our approach and continue to support the evidence. There is a huge mountain of evidence. We just need to get the authorities to take it seriously. The amount of times, for example, that Anthony's been frustrated by various bits of government refusing to see the evidence. It's awful. It is absolutely awful. Things could not be as distrustworthy as they have been. It's really, really awful. Nina, could I just very briefly ask you for yourself and Lee to just very briefly explain to me what your aims and objectives are, as succinctly as you can, because I don't have much time. Thank you. Neely, you're on mute.
I've got 5 murders in my family because I come from a family of honourable judges who've, my dad escaped to England because he was under gun control in India in the early 60s. My family goes back 300 years as honourable judges who've been under gunpoint. In Pakistan, 2003, 10 judges were shot dead in Sialkot prison. One of them was my cousin, Chowdhury. And so my dad fought when my baby niece was mutilated in the hospital in 2000 with the president of the Law Society of Uganda, Dr. Akina Adoko, and I've been trying. My baby niece's body is in a freezer in a mortuary for 23 years in India now, and we're trying to get a criminal investigation. So I know a little bit more about criminal failures in England that what needs to be done. And not only that, my own home was taken because I became the pharmacist whistleblower. And then my late sister, my sister died prematurely as a result of banking frauds. Her name is not on the mortgage deed. Her name is not on the land registry. The probate is ongoing, but they took the house last year, threw me out in the streets, nearly died. And so I'm determined to get the banks dissolved as a result of the murders they've committed with these banking frauds against my family. Okay, so it's a bit of a, yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I kind of detached myself from it, and I tried to do other cases. Edward Ellis has got 200 similar cases. And so, yeah, it's something that we're all converging. We're all bringing together our own, you know, talents, and we're all very highly professional people. And everything, it's just the same pattern. It's the same case. It's ditto. Suicide is to me, it's a corporate manslaughter. It's a murder. You know,
We've
so.
got, oh my goodness, just very, very briefly, one of our members is trying to use the Suicide Act, where it can be shown that the Financial Conduct Authority is, we believe, in breach of the Suicide Act, where it did things that could have resulted in somebody choosing to end his or her life. So I'm on the same wavelength as you. There is egregious, frankly devilish behaviour by the banks. Thank you for explaining that, Nida. I did not know your background.
Oh, that's okay. I'm a singer and songwriter, and you know, I do other stuff, teacher. But I just I'm just doing this dived into the deep end now, and I'm determined to get this to the end. So I'll just ask Anthony to respond to anything you've said or I've said, in case you have to go.
If I may just briefly, Lee, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, please? I'm just trying to sort of understand the context here and the dynamic here. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, I'm a victim similar to Nilu, where my bank account was frozen, and for many months, about 6 months, and then they refused. Even my family needed some money to buy food, just £100, £200 to buy necessities to keep alive, and they refused. They refused to even release £10 to buy food, even though I had £2,000 in my bank account. And then, so I spent hundreds and hundreds of pounds, hours trying to seek remedy. And it's not just me. There's probably at least 10,000 other people who are suffering the same.
Lee, can I give an introduction of you?
And I'm also a member of the Royal Commission as well, but they seem to ignore that. They dismiss the Royal Commission, and you get nowhere with them. And then, and I've been to court, civil courts. The judges don't even bother reading the file. They don't look at the evidence. They just issue an order, and the order is, "Oh, your case has no merit." And you're starving. You haven't even eaten
Lee,
for
can I
2
just
days.
Lee, can I add what you're really about is you've had you've exposed corruption with Hackney Council. The Hackney Council have pursued you for service charges, which they haven't provided any services.
Are fraudulent.
And then you've then been targeted. You've had an attempt on your life, which has not been properly prosecuted by the police.
Exactly.
Where you were nearly strangled.
I'm shocked at what I've heard.
Bones were broken. Yeah.
I'm shocked at what I've heard, and oh my goodness me, I have to jump off now.
Okay,
I wish I could,
sure.
And Lee, and
I'd love to come along. Yeah, on TTF. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I must go. Anthony, thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good day. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I learned a lot about the different types of banking frauds from the TTF, and it was actually quite encouraging that so much exposure has gone on. And so, Anthony, do you know if there's been any more reports since the last reports that you've done regarding the ongoing money laundering?
It's very difficult. I mean, I get more and more victims, you know, I hear from. But I mean, what is depressing is nothing has been done about it by the regulatory authorities. And the Treasury Select Committee, which has looked at this on a couple of occasions, I can't remember how many members it's got, but I've turned up and listened to it. And I'm not allowed to comment or do anything. I just sit in the background. But most of the Conservative members come from the very banking backgrounds that were responsible for this, or the companies that were responsible for this. And most of the Labour ones don't know really enough about it to be able to make much of a contribution. So the Treasury Select Committee, I think, has been absolutely tied up. It's come up with nothing. It's been aware of this for a very, very long time now. So you have the regulatory authorities doing nothing about it. You have government doing nothing about it. You have the police doing nothing about it. It's very difficult to take it on, and the banks just sail through imperviously through the middle. And what is, rather delightful, I have to say, is Nigel Farage caught them out absolutely completely on this particular case, and it's raising the profile hugely. But it's the tip of the iceberg of something that is far bigger that has been going on underneath. So for the first time, I'm slightly encouraged. And the great thing about Farage is he's very difficult to shut up. So we will see what happens.
I'll try and delay putting this out till after you've finished, because I don't want to cause any conflicts.
Is there any, more enforcement, Anthony, coming from any task force or?
No, I mean, the trouble is the easiest way to cover things up is to start another Quango or another committee or another something. And that takes ages. I mean, we've had the Dame Linda report into what went on in Lloyds and HBOS. It's been 7 years. It's paid for by Lloyds. It's in their pocket as far as one can make out. It's all the other reports, the Atkins reports and other ones. They're just hidden. They don't come out. And the last thing we need are more regulatory authorities. What we actually need is for the regulatory authorities not to be peopled by the very people committing the frauds very often or beholden to them. We want independent, fair, proper regulatory authorities, not ones that are in the pocket of the bank. So starting another one, I don't think, things like the Banking Resolution Service, BBRS, that has ended up completely in the pocket of the banks and has achieved nothing. It's cost far more money, I gather, to set it up and pay for it than they've ever actually paid out. The thing is a complete ramp. And so it goes on. So I don't want more committees and more this or more that. What I want is the ones we have to be run properly and honestly.
Yeah, over to you, Lee.
It seems that a complete restructuring of everything is required, restructuring of the FCA, and it doesn't function properly. So maybe we could completely replace it totally. And even the boards of directors of these big banks, they perhaps may need to be replaced as well.
Absolutely they do.
Something completely different. I think we need more shareholder participation, and the owners of the bank need to really get to grips with what's happening deep inside the bank itself.
And also the money laundered, the 200 billion a year since 10 years, that can be easily recovered, because there's always an audit trail, isn't there?
They can destroy the audit trail and cover it up, which is what's probably happened with HBOS and Commerce Bank, and
Was
Deutsche.
Anthony going to say something then?
No, I was saying, going back to the regulatory authorities and everything, we do actually have a police force whose sole raison d'etre, really, is a City of London fraud. That is the City of London Police. When did they last take on a major fraud in the city? And the answer is, I can't remember. What is the point of them? They pay a lot of very senior police officers a great deal of money to go to social events in London and do precisely nothing, as far as I can make out. I mean, why was it, that it required Thames Valley to take on a major banking fraud? It should have been the City of London Police. They don't take on major fraud. What is the purpose of them? And I think the Met Police, again, should have been taking on numerous cases. I think they're underqualified, and I think parts of it are downright corrupt, and I think the evidence shows that. And I go back to massive cases like the Michelle Young case and things like that involve billions. And the murder of her ex-husband out of the window, which was put down as suicide, is one of the most extraordinary investigations. And you have to believe that it was corrupt. If it wasn't corrupt, it was almost unbelievable incompetence very often. And so you're left very often, with this very difficult question with the police and other people. Is it corruption? Is it incompetence? Or is it sheer bloody idleness? And I get the impression very often it's a bit of a mixture of all three, but it's difficult to tell. But you can look at individual cases and find corruption. I've no doubt about that.
And also, it seems to me that when they've got these individuals that they're punishing for, whilst the bank is still carrying on, when they've got these people in prison, I don't believe that they actually do go to prison. I think they're recruited in other crimes abroad. I mean, because the bank is still fraudulently trading. And so that crime has escalated because very few of those that were doing it were done. And so it seems to me that obviously the criminal justice system is actually supporting this criminal activity over.
I think, in the Thames Valley case, they went to prison. There's no doubt about that. And I can't remember, they're coming out now. They're coming out at half their sentences. It was a mistake because I think they were all aware of a great deal more of what had gone on. And I think, like so often, when you do something, you get the middle rank people, the senior rank people wander off, carry on, and end up in the House of Lords sometimes. So yes, we do put people in prison, but very, very rarely for fraud. The maximum sentence for fraud is 15 years. Those people that we got on the HBOS case, I think the total sentence is about 48 or 49 years between 6 of them. But there were a lot of other people involved in that. And as I said, the sum of money that disappeared was not 245 million. It was 2 or 3 times bigger than that.
Sorry.
I said I've got to go in about 4 minutes, yeah.
Okay, so in conclusion, that what we expect for the remedies is that for the money that's been laundered abroad, wherever to be recovered, to bring it in to pay the damages, because that criminal activity, that crime money, proceeds of crime money, whilst it's out there, those crimes are escalating as far as the failure of the criminal justice system goes. And then Anthony's, the money that Anthony's described is this inequality of the City of London, the parallels with what they go ahead and do that's corporate as opposed to what they should do, which is to help the individuals to bring, so that it wasn't the Thames Valley that had to fund it. Surely they probably had a bigger budget and they could have easily stopped it if they really wanted to, but they don't. And then we can then start to lay foundations of honor and respectability of, and there should be only individuals who have been compensated from 10, 20 years ago. They should be compensated first. That's what I think. I don't know if Lee wants to add some more conclusions as we conclude. Anthony's got a minute or so.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. No, over to Anthony to conclude. Yeah.
No, I think we have an opening now. It is within the public attention now, thanks to Nigel Farage bringing it up. One aspect of people losing their bank accounts. I think it's utterly disgraceful when bank accounts are closed down and people can't withdraw their money. I mean, that is theft, as far as one can make out. But it's the banks deliberately bringing companies and individuals down through the use of false information, false documentation, forged documentation. All sorts of shenanigans have gone on to make money out of people who were totally honest and were carrying on their businesses totally fairly. And it is a scandal. The sums of money involved are vast. There are many, many billion involved in this. And it is hugely damaging to the country when you attack small and medium-sized companies, particularly. And nobody trusts our banks now. I mean, they've done immeasurable damage to themselves. But that doesn't matter to the directors, who are all walking off with very large sums of money in their pockets, letters after their name, titles, and so forth. Where the only people that are damaged is British, UK Limited. It's our companies, and the banks themselves are damaged. You only have to look at the damage that's done to Coates. I think that's the end of the bank, probably. I would expect the managing director to have to resign over it fairly quickly.
And the assets, the trading ceased, and the assets seized, I guess, when there's corruption, if they're at the banks, or I don't know that case. Sorry,
I don't know how you get the money back. I mean, the government has had to bail out our two biggest banks, in a massive way, with billions to keep them going. So when this money disappears, I mean, it's very difficult to take it off the banks themselves, because the banks have already lost the money. It's well gone through their directors and everything. And this is what needs sorting out. And it's not being sorted out. And until we have, I mean, the serious fraud office, the SFO, is very, very small. It's totally underfunded, and it usually loses its cases. The Financial Conduct Authority seems to have been in the pocket of the banks. The National Crime Agency is completely hopeless on fraud. Hasn't